And there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and today we're going to be talking about sympathy for the media. Yeah. I was going to go with a Rolling Stones song there, but it just didn't seem quite right. But one thing that we have to keep in mind when it comes to how the media reports the news is that there is a default setting, and that is it's always defaulting to the left, meaning if there is anything that is coming from the right, it is presumed to be wrong, dangerous, criminal, threatening, divisive, racist, whatever the case may be. And if you have watched enough news or if you have perused enough news, you start to pick up on this pattern fairly quickly. Let me give you an example, though. In fact, I want to start out with some words of wisdom from a blogger by the name of Michael Herman. This is from his Substack. He points out that the default position of all mainstream media, from ABC, NBC, CBS, cable news networks, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, yes, he includes them and rightly does. For all of the media, the default position is always to be stated from the left's standing position. The right must be defeated. The right is wrong. The right is always at fault. Democrats are the party that cares, the party that wants the U.S. to move forward. They are everything that is good with America. And so that means on issues like climate change, it's always stated from the left as if it's a given. Well, everybody agrees the science is settled, except it's not. It's stated as if it is, but it's really not. Racism is systemic, we are told. That too is acting. They act as if it is a given, but it's not really a given. It's just stated from the left as if everybody should know this. Same thing with abortion, you name it. So with that in mind, let's give you a very tangible example of what that looks like. Okay, this is from the Salt Lake Tribune. Here's the headline: Ban of transgender people from Utah's public bathrooms passes Senate. Really? So transgender people are just going to have to hold it until somehow somebody comes to their rescue and either creates transgender bathrooms or just acknowledges that, they are allowed to force whatever it is they believe, their preference, upon everybody else. It's pretty manipulative. What this headline, if it was truthful, would be saying is transgender people are not extended special rights to impose themselves by going into bathrooms of those who are not like them or like they were born biologically. In other words, if you were born a man, you don't go into the women's restroom. Even if you dress like a woman, even if you think you're a woman, it's not your prerogative to force that on everybody else. That's what a narcissist would demand. And Utah is saying, no. Now, this doesn't mean that they can't use any bathroom. They need to use one that either corresponds with their biological sex, or there are various unisex bathrooms. It's not like, they're totally being shut out and again being told they just have to hold it until society comes to its senses. But you can see the way that it's twisted. And by the way, this deserves a little bit closer look. If you saw, these were activists storming the Utah State Capitol. If you can't read the sign in this person's hands, I don't know if it's he, she, or she, trans joy is power. Oh man, look at that picture for just one. There's a lot of joy. You can feel the joy just exuding from this individual. But that's how the press reports this. It's very sympathetic. Anybody who stands up for normalcy, what normal society would say, which is, men and women are different. We really shouldn't be trying to blur the line and make this, some place where people can just impose themselves on others. Yeah, you're treated like you're the problem. Again, it's always coming at it from the left's angle. So this one of the great examples of how this has resulted in backlash that I think it was foreseen by some, but perhaps not by those who engage in it the most, is, as I mentioned in a previous episode this week, the LA Times laid off 115 reporters. Now, Taylor Lorenz is known to a lot of folks in the national media. I believe she worked for the New York Times, but she is panicking about the total collapse of mainstream media, mass layoffs across the industry. She's talking about what a dangerous thing this is, how terrible. Oh my goodness, all of these reporters, how else are we going to get the news out there? How else are we going to know what's real and what isn't? So I thought you would appreciate some of the responses. And I'll tell you, they're direct. Clifton Duncan says, look, the collective meltdown is hilarious. It's a long overdue market correction, and they, meaning these reporters, have no idea how to handle it. That they think the sky is falling is indicative of a grossly inflated sense of self-importance, which is one of the reasons we don't like them. Okay, it's a good point. I like what AJK says, 100%. She's bringing an entitlement mindset to a conversation about merit. Journalism exists to inform the people, not to employ journalists. It's like when teachers forgot that schools exist to teach kids, not to employ adults. How often do we see that? Don't let your teachers union rep answer that. They'll have an answer that I'm sure would be quite fiery. Now, I want you to take a quick look at this. These are actual Los Angeles Times headlines. And tell me if you see any kind of bias. Is there anything that's coming at this from the left? White drivers are polluting the air breathed by LA's people of color. Yeah, no agenda in that. Experts see little evidence that protests spread the coronavirus in the US. Now they're talking about Black Lives Matter protests. Opinion, unvaccinated adults, LA Times readers are infuriated with you. Yeah, look at the date of that, 2021. Editorial, bring on the crackdown. The unvaccinated must be held accountable. Children apologize to their dying elders for spreading COVID-19 as LA County reels. Column, Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy. You've been warned. Why? Well, because Larry Elder as a black man doesn't go along with the woke agenda. And this is one that I think really kind of got pushed back in their faces, and rightly so. Column, mocking anti-vaxxers' COVID deaths is ghoulish, yes, but may be necessary. And finally, are the unvaccinated still a danger to the rest of us? Now, these are actual LA Times headlines. In other words, this was actually passed off as, well, this is news, this is journalism. And yet they have the temerity to wonder, why are people not rallying to our support? Why are people actually cheering to see us laid off? And I guess Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, said it best. He says, I'm starting to think that brainwashing the American public with obvious BS day after day is not a good business model. You know who doesn't understand that point? Answer, the investigative reporters who are getting fired. Somehow they missed the story about how they are all fake news and narrative tossers. By the way, this was I thought, a particularly fine poke. There's a picture of the LA Times newsroom from a couple of days ago. The LA Times newsroom, what's missing? Well, Spike Cohen had the answer. He said the lies. I know we shouldn't be having enjoyment at the expense of someone who is in distress. But I can't think of a group more worthy of finally having karma catch up with them and take a good healthy bite out of their posterior. By the way, thank you to the Babylon Bee for giving us a little bit of a humorous take on this. Laid off LA Times reporter sits on street corner with sign reading, "We'll call you racist for food." I guess we'll see how that plays out. So now let's shift it to a little bit closer to home, and let's talk a little bit about some of the bias here in Idaho's corporate media. Now, this is an editorial, but this illustrates the problem very well. It's from the Idaho Statesman, which can be counted on to take that always to the left slant. This is Ammon Mayor Sean Coletti. Diversity makes Idaho better and stronger. We should encourage it, not fight it. Now, this is in response to a bill that has been proposed and actually is moving forward, courtesy of Senator Brian Lenny, that would do away with diversity, equity, and inclusivity, basically DEI dogma in higher education. And so he's trying to make the case here that, well, diversity makes us better and stronger. We should encourage it. But he's not using the same words that most of us would use to describe diversity. Diversity under DEI stands for discrimination. The E stands for exclusion. The I can't remember what it stands for, but it's not for inclusivity. It's about keeping people isolated. There we go. It's isolation. And I did like Matt Edwards' response here. Ah, yes, diversity, except for diversity of thought. That's why the Statesman will never print an op-ed from Brian Lenny on DEI. All right, let's dig into a couple of news stories here. This has to do with a bill that has been proposed that would allow for the arming of teachers in Idaho schools. Now, right now, Idaho's concealed carry law, I believe, prohibits you from having a gun on your person unless you have an enhanced concealed carry permit. But I want you to see how the Lewiston Tribune handles this because they go right to that, again, default left setting of, well, this is just a bunch of wannabe cops out there wanting to go out there and act like they're Rambo. Listen to their take on this. It's jeers that they have for Representative Ted Hill, who's a freshman from Eagle. He knows how to protect Idaho's children from gun violence in schools. The best solution to this, looking at it, is having an effective physical security posture and to have security guards on site, Hill told the House State Affairs Committee on Wednesday. I tried to look at that. I looked at all the options. Retired police officers charge $60 an hour. At 2 per school, that was $120 million. That would be the cost to provide guards across the state. That's the best solution. Absolutely. Well, that's not going to happen. And to this, he's saying, why don't we let the teachers be armed? Well, the Lewiston Tribune is saying, well, not only is Idaho too cheap to spend $120 million to protect its precious children from being murdered in their classrooms, but the state's leadership lacks the nerve to get at the real cause. Here comes that left-wing default. Too many people with access to assault weapons and high-capacity magazines designed to kill as many victims as possible, as quickly as possible. Now, you know who else has access to assault weapons and high-capacity magazines? That would be police. Now, is their goal to kill as many people as possible? No, I'd really like to know, is that the purpose for it? And if so, why do we consider that a good thing if as long as it's being done by agents of the state? Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So why would they have such things? Well, because in a life-threatening situation, this is what's best to negate lethal force that someone else is bringing against innocent people. And the same thing works for civilians and cops alike. I mean, it works for the public just as well as it does for law enforcement. So they say Hill is rubbing nickels together. He would allow everyone from a bus driver to a librarian, from a coach to a teacher, to decide for themselves whether to carry a concealed firearm to school. And why not? That is absolutely their right. Not under the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment just recognizes and tells government, hey, you need to butt out as far as this right is concerned. It is their right by virtue of the fact that they are a living, breathing human being. It's a natural right. Everything has a right to self-defense. And so for people who decide to take responsibility for that, that's not a bad thing. Unless, of course, you're coming at it from that leftist, statist mindset, which believes that everything that's not under the direct control of the state is somehow, by definition, out of control. It's pathetic, but there it is. Right there on display. Now let's take a look at how the Idaho press handles this. Same story. You have to answer violence with violence. They knew that quote would get a lot of people stirred up. Bill to allow teachers to conceal carry goes to Idaho House. So here's how Laura Guido reported it. A bill that would require Idaho schools to allow employees and volunteers to carry guns if they have an enhanced concealed weapons license is heading to the full House for a vote. The House State Affairs Committee voted along party lines Wednesday to send HB 415 to the floor. Now, she points out testimony was overwhelmingly in opposition to the bill. And I'm going to point something out here that may be unpopular. This might hurt a few people's feelings, but it needs to be said. The public generally is overwhelmingly ignorant about the role of the personal firearm in civilized society. I'm sorry, but there it is. How do I know this? Well, because I have actually taken the time, as well as a number of other people have taken the time, to go and get training. And I don't mean just, go punch holes in paper with friends or shoot tin cans or stop signs or whatever it is, but to actually get quality firearms training. And you learn very quickly, first of all, how much you don't know. And that's the crazy thing. You don't even know what you don't know until somebody starts to teach you. And so the vast majority of people, especially those who don't own guns, have no idea. When is it appropriate? Which is really one of the big questions that has to be answered. When is it appropriate to bring lethal force into a situation? When and how to do it is kind of like a strong minor. And good quality training courses will teach you when it's appropriate with a strong minor in how to do what needs to be done. Now, that sounds like a terrible thing to people, but that's what we ask of our police. And you'll find in many of these classes, you're training right alongside police officers who are trying to sharpen up their skills. It's not like this is some magical thing that only those who wear the magic costume of the state and have the appropriate jewelry pinned to their chest, are going to be able to pull it off. It can be done by anybody who takes it seriously and is willing to pay the price to learn what they don't know. Most people don't know, and that's why I say the vast majority of people are pretty ignorant about this. And they'll believe news headlines and say, oh my gosh, violence with violence. Oh, that sounds like a terrible thing. It just makes things worse. All right, let's go back to the story here. The bill would also release the employees from liability in the event of a shooting for either deciding to engage or deciding not to. And it would implement a fine for any district displaying a gun-free zone sign, which basically is telling bad guys, hey, you're not going to find any resistance here. Now, why would they release employees from liability in the event of a shooting for either deciding to engage or deciding not to? Because every situation is different. And here's the difference between those employees and sworn law enforcement. Sworn law enforcement has a duty to intervene. Okay, that's part of why they put their hand up and take the oath. That's what they agreed to do. That's not to say their lives are worth less. It's just, they have the training, they have the numbers on their side, the organization that when a situation like that arises, they are duty bound to go in there. Now, Uvalde, Texas showed us that that was sometimes we're asking more than some are willing to do. And there was some very cowardly behavior on the part of law enforcement there. Parents getting arrested for begging to go and rescue their children. And law enforcement just sat there for the better part of an hour while kids were being murdered, one after another after another. Now, the story goes on to tell us the bill's sponsor, Representative Ted Hill, says the bill is intended to allow teachers and other staff to step in if there's a school shooting, as they can respond more quickly than law enforcement until they arrive. This is true. Now, they try to make this sound like this is a terrible thing. Well, why can't they just wait? Look, when an emergency, a life-threatening emergency arises, the need to act is then. And the authority to act can't be on the end of the phone, okay, we're talking to the 911 dispatcher and, she's telling us all to hunker down or whatnot. The need to deal with the problem is right then. That means the responsibility is going to be on the people who are there at the time. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody needs to carry a gun, but for those people who do take that responsibility, and especially those who have taken the responsibility and assumed the responsibility of becoming better trained, more competent, better able to think through a stressful situation. And by the way, that's what a lot of the training in a good quality defensive firearms class will teach you. Why not? Well, there's this concern that people are going to come and they're going to see people with guns and think everybody's a gunman. There is that risk. And it even happened in Aurora, Colorado. A concealed carry permit holder stopped a gunman who was starting a mass shooting. He put the gunman down and a responding officer killed the Good Samaritan. Okay, it can happen. Cops also get hit by friendly fire. Sometimes they shoot the wrong person. But the bottom line is the need to act is then while the emergency is taking place, not, as soon as they can get there with my friends at 80 miles an hour. So back to the story. The article in in the Idaho Press says the legislation would authorize any employee, volunteer, or contracted employee to notify school administrators that they intend to conceal carry a gun if they have an enhanced license. Now, to obtain an enhanced license, Idahoans must take an 8-hour course that includes instruction on state laws related to firearms, basic concepts of responsible use of handguns, self-defense principles, and live fire training with at least 98 rounds, according to Idaho code. Now, this is portrayed in the story as if, well, that's the bare minimum they're going to do. And actually, I've seen journalists that say, well, I went and took the course and they just did the bare minimum. That doesn't describe the mindset, though, or the actions of people who take this responsibility seriously. They will, on their own dime, devote much more time, effort, and money to painfully afford the best training they can possibly get. Why? Because they know that it counts. So it's good to have those minimum standards. But again, you're talking about people who already are willing to step up and do the needful to become more competent. And a big part of that competence isn't just being able to put that bullet where you want it. It's knowing when it's appropriate and knowing how to function under extreme stress. Nearly 100 people were told signed up to testify against the bill. The committee sign-in sheet shows, again, no surprise there. 100 people, I would think it would be even higher, given the amount of ignorance that exists regarding the use of the firearm in personal protection. 5 people signed up in favor of the bill. Dozens of representatives from, here we have it, a lobbying group, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, attended the meeting, and some spoke in opposition to the bill, arguing that providing guns to employees with limited training may further endanger children rather than protect them. So they'd rather have people just be helpless while they wait for police to arrive. Again, you don't have to look too far to find examples of citizens, and I think the kid's name was Elisha Dickin in Indiana. A mass shooting started to unfold at the mall where he and his girlfriend were there. This is a young man, 21 years old, carrying his own, personal firearm, and under stress, from 40 yards away. He landed 8 out of 10 shots on the shooter and stopped the shooting almost immediately. There were, I think, a couple of people who were killed by the shooter, but it was stopped so much quicker. And I have to give the police credit in that case. You know, the press were trying to ask all these gotcha questions. Well, why was he carrying a gun when there were signs to say no concealed weapons allowed? And why was he doing this? And the police chief was just like, would you shut up? He just told him he did the best that anybody could have done, including he did as well or even better than trained officers could have done in that situation. So let's not pretend that, it could never happen. Nobody could ever, figure out the right thing to do. They certainly can. Now, here's a quick appeal to authority from the Idaho Press article. Diana David said she and her husband are gun owners and a law enforcement and military family, as well as gun violence survivors. Oh my gosh, check off all those boxes of intersectionality here. She said this legislation may allow guns into the hands of the wrong people. I'd like some explanation. How so? Who are the wrong people? She also said the 8 hours of training required for an enhanced license were inadequate. I don't think the state should be requiring any, just because the people who are serious about this will get all of that training and more because they know that's what they need to do. David said, words matter, common sense matters, especially when attached to a weapon that can take a life in a nanosecond. Well, when someone is taking innocent life, you don't have the luxury of waiting for the people who have been properly trained and the people who have been properly, structured and granted authority by the state to act. You don't always have that luxury. So this isn't about turning everybody into, some kind of a combat veteran. This is about allowing those people who take that responsibility seriously to be able to act without fear of some kind of legal repercussions. Hill responded that there would be school districts that don't want to implement this bill, but he wanted it to be a statewide option for employees. Some people will get nervous about this, but they don't understand the violence. If you understand the pattern of violence, you have to answer violence with violence. Now, I can hear the gasps from some people in the press go, oh, he's talking about more violence. Why? Adding guns to the mix is just going to make it so much worse. Look, if that was the case, then why would you call police? What are they going to bring to the situation? They're going to bring overwhelming violence to end the threat. The sooner that there is someone on the scene who's capable of ending that threat, the better the likelihood it's going to be stopped before more innocent lives are lost. I know but again, when we slant it to the left, only people who are acting on behalf of the state could possibly be trusted in such a situation. That's just not the case. But you'd actually have to attend some kind of a training class in order to understand that. And there aren't that many people who've done it. It's a shame. Thousands and thousands of people have. They understand. They know what they didn't know before. And they're on that pathway of going from unconsciously incompetent to unconsciously competent. But it takes time, it takes effort, it takes training, it takes practice. Most of all, it takes a willingness to accept the responsibility. And that's something that for some reason statists just don't want us to consider. Why? Because, we might figure out that maybe we don't need all of those political types, there to save us, to answer our prayers. I hope you find this somewhat thought-provoking and hopefully gives you a little bit better angle from which to look at some of these different news stories. Yes, they're going to come at it from that supposition that, this is nothing but trouble, but that's coming at it from a leftward view. Step back, get the 30,000-foot view of what's going on here, and then ask yourself, are they telling me the whole truth? Are they giving me enough facts that I can make an informed decision on my own? And if the answer is no, maybe it's time to step away from the press. I think a lot of people are finding it's more like pollution or mind poison than we had originally thought. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.